Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf begins immediately following a Mishnah which discusses what happens if you have an animal that is designated to be one type of carbon and you bring it as a different type of carbon. Now there are two types of ways you could do that. One is if you purposefully try to change the carbon from what the animal is designated as to a different type of carbon. There, the type of carbon you're trying to bring is definitely the second type of carbon, the change carbon. You cannot change the designation, and therefore the carbon is puzzle. If it's, for example, you're trying to bring a carbon Pesach as a different type of carbon, and it's Shabbos, you brought a puzzle carbon, and therefore you're Mechalel Shabbos. That is called a change of an akira. You purposely try to change it from what it is to something else. There's a different type of change, which is called betois, where you have an animal that's set aside, let's say, to be a carbon Pesach, and you thought it was something else, and therefore you brought it as something else. Now, there's a machlokes in Mesechus Menachos whether that counts as an akira or not. Is the carbon you're actually bringing the type you tried to bring, or is it really what it actually is? You didn't understand what it was, but it actually is what you actually brought it as. Now, in our Mishnah here, we begin with the halacha, the Mishnah which concluded the daf previous. We begin with a halacha that says that if somebody brings a carbon Pesach as a different type of carbon, it's puzzle and he violates Shabbos. Now, says the Gemara, we have to be talking about where it's an akira, where you're purposefully trying to change the designation. Because if it's talking about where it was a mistake, then this should establish the halacha that a mistaken change does change the designation, and you are bringing the second type of carbon. Because if you were bringing the original type, then it would be kosher. Why is the Mishnah rule that it's puzzle? Now, it's a problem because it's a machlokes whether or not a mistaken akira works or not, a mistaken change. So our Mishnah has got to be talking about where you change it on purpose, at least in its first case. The problem is that if you look in the Mishnah's second case, there it's clearly talking about where it was a mistake. Why? The second case is if you have a different type of carbon, not a carbon Pesach, and you bring it as a carbon Pesach, and there's a machlokes. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it's a puzzle carbon. You try to bring it as something other than what it originally is. You try to bring it as a Pesach, and it's not a Pesach, and therefore you are chayav carbon chatas. According to Rabbi Yeshua, no, this is considered to be an error. You didn't bring it b'shoigeg. It's an error. You got confused. You're in the middle of a mitzvah. You brought it as an error. Now, if you intentionally tried to change the designation, that's not an error. You knew what you were doing. So it's got to be talking about where it was a mistake. This is a problem. That means that the first case in the Mishnah is talking about where it was on purpose. Change of the designation was on purpose. And the second case is talking about where it was by mistake. So Gemara says that Rav Avin says, yes, that is correct. The Reish, the same for the first case. And the second case is talking about different cases. The Gemara says that Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef found Rabbi Avo in a crowd of people, and he asked him what's with this Mishnah, and he said, yes, the first case is talking about where it was on purpose, the second case is where it was talking about by mistake. He chazed it over 4 times, and he had it in his pocket. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. But Rabbi Eliezer went and he brought a proof to himself. And his proof was a kal v'chomer from the first halacha in the Mishnah to the second halacha in the Mishnah. He said, if a Pesach, which is kosher to bring on Shabbos, and you change its name, becomes possible, you have to bring a carbon chatas, so a different carbon which is possible to bring on Shabbos, and you make it even worse, and you go change its name, certainly you should have to bring a carbon chatas to get a kapara for that. Now, how could you bring the kal v'chomer if the first case was talking about where it was a mistake, where it was a purposeful change, where it was an akira, and the second case is talking about where it's a mistake? That's no kal v'chomer. So Gemara says, you're right. According to Rabbi Eliezer, there is no difference. He learns that you're chayav chatas in both cases. He learns that both cases are talking about where there is a mistake, where you purposefully changed the designation. That's what he's talking about. The Gemara says, but 1 second. But he was arguing on Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Yeshua didn't answer him by saying, no, I'm talking about where it's a mistake. Why didn't he just answer him and say, we're talking about where it's a mistake? The Gemara says he could have answered that. He had a better answer. The answer that he gave also works. He said, here you're changing the carbon from something that makes it better to something that makes it worse. That's why it becomes problematic here. But he could have answered as well and said, I'm talking about where it's a mistaken designation, and therefore your proof is not a proof to this situation at all. The Gemara now moves deeper into analyzing the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Their machlokes is, again, a situation where somebody brought a different carbon as a carbon Pesach, and there Rabbi Eliezer says you brought the wrong carbon, you did an Isser, you chayav a carbon chatas. Rabbi Yeshua says no. This is what's called a toya b'dvar mitzvah. You were trying to do a mitzvah, and you were involved in a different mitzvah. Meaning what you did is actually a mitzvah. It may not have been a correct mitzvah. You may not have been supposed to do it on Shabbos, but you did do a mitzvah. And the reason why you got confused is because you were involved in a different mitzvah. Situation like that, toya b'dvar mitzvah, you don't have to bring a korban chatas. So the Mishnah had recorded their conversation as to whether a toya b'dvar mitzvah exempts you from a korban chatas or not. The Gemara had said that Rabbi Eliezer tried to bring a proof from other karbanos that you're supposed to bring on Erev Pesach, which falls on Shabbos, like a korban tamid or a korban musaf. Those things, the Mishnah had been pretty clear that if you bring those, but you do it wrongly, you are chayav chatas. So why should you be chayav chatas for those? According to Rabbi Yeshua, it should still be a toya b'dvar mitzvah. You did a mitzvah that you're supposed to do. You did it wrongly because you got confused because you're supposed to do other thing else. So the Mishnah had answered that Rabbi Yeshua will tell you it's different there because you didn't have an excuse for getting it confused. There's only one korban tamid and one korban musaf, two korban tamidim throughout the whole day. So there's a fixed amount. So what'd you get confused for? That's a mistake you should not have made, and therefore you're chayav a korban chatas. Where do you have an excuse? That's where you have a good reason for getting confused, like a korban Pesach, where there's lots of them and you don't know how many they're supposed to be, and you saw a sheep walking around, you figured it's a korban. So the Gemara says, so now you're telling me that if you have a fixed amount, you don't have a good excuse. Well, I'll show you a case where we have a fixed amount, and Rabbi Yeshua says you putter anyway. What's that case? The case is where you do a bris milah on Shabbos you weren't supposed to do. And the Gemara quotes a brisa. The brisa says as follows. Let's say you have two babies that need a bris milah. One is supposed to get a bris milah on Shabbos, one is supposed to get a bris milah on Sunday. So over there, Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer both agree that if you do the one on Sunday, the one that's supposed to be for Sunday, if you do that on Shabbos, you chayav chatas. You can't say that I did a mitzvah and I made a mistake because there was no mitzvah. You gave the bris a day early. A bris a day early is not a mitzvah at all. So therefore, there's no excuse. You both hold chayav chatas. However, what if one was supposed to get a bris on Friday and the bris got delayed from Friday? Maybe the boy was yellow or whatever it is. So now you have two brisim. One he's supposed to do on Shabbos because it's 8th day of Shabbos. The other one he was supposed to do on Shabbos. It got pushed off. You can't do it on Shabbos anymore. It's not the Deiche Shabbos if it's not its 8th day. But you have two babies, and what he ended up doing is he ended up doing a bris for both of them. So the one that he wasn't supposed to do that day, he was Mechal Shabbos. So here's the Machlekes for Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua that you have to bring a korban chatas for that or not. Rabbi Eliezer says yes, no excuses, there's no concept of toya b'dvar mitzvah. But Rabbi Yeshua says no, this is a toya b'dvar mitzvah. He did do a mitzvah of bris milah, and he got confused. Now over here you have a set fixed amount. So how come over here we say you're a toya b'dvar mitzvah, but in the case of somebody who brought the korban tamid as a Pesach, you don't say that. So the Gemara answers, there's a big difference over here. Here we're talking about where you did the baby you weren't supposed to do. You did that first. And the time you did the one you weren't supposed to do, the time you were Mechal Shabbos, you had a bris you were supposed to do. You're supposed to do the other one. So there's a reason for being mixed up. There's still a mitzvah you're supposed to do, and you got confused, you did the wrong one. But Mishnah is talking about where you already were makar of the tamidim and the musafim. You already did all the mitzvahs you're supposed to do. So now you have no excuse for making a mistake and bringing another korban, and that's why there Rabbi Yeshua would say that there's no excuse of toya b'dvar mitzvah, and you do have to bring a korban chatas for that. The Gemara asks, if this is true what you say there, Rabbi Yeshua holds that whenever the mitzvah you're supposed to do is done already, and you have no right to get confused, then you are chayav, even if you made a mistake in a dvar mitzvah, and that's why when you're bringing a karbonos, when you bring a korban tamid or musaf, you're supposed to bring that day, you bring an extra one, and the one is already brought. That's why you're chayiv, because you can't claim you got mixed up because you were trying to do a mitzvah because the mitzvah already happened. If that's true, then why would Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah argue and say that you are putter? What would the explanation there be? If you already did all the tamidim and the musafim, why would Rabbi Meir say that you're putter? You don't have to bring a korban chatas. And we're going to prove to you from a different brisa that Rabbi Meir should agree to this concept. He should say that if the mitzvah was done already, there is no excuse. You can't say I made a mistake in the dvar mitzvah and you chayev. What's the brisa? So Rabbi Meir quotes the machlekes between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer inverted of the way we saw it up to now. Up to now we saw that the machlekes is in the case where the two children were for Friday and Shabbos the Armila was supposed to be. Says Rabbi Meir, no. In the case of Friday and Shabbos, there's no machlokes. They both agree you're chayiv. Where's the machlokes? Machlokes is where the brisim was supposed to be on Shabbos and on Sunday, and you did them both on Shabbos. Now, how do you understand this version? How does Rabbi Meir make any sense? Why should they have a machlokes in the case of Shabbos and Sunday, and not have a machlokes, and both agree that it's chayav in the case of Friday and Shabbos? Obviously, the only way to understand that that Rabbi Shua agrees that you chayav a karban chatas if the bris was supposed to be Friday and he did it Shabbos, it must be referring to that you already did the Shabbos bris, and therefore you have no excuse to do the Friday bris. You did the Friday bris, you chayav for it. Now, the case of the Sunday bris, that's where he got confused, and there was the first bris he did was the Sunday bris on Shabbos, and therefore he could still say, listen, I had a reason to be excused, I have an excuse for being confused, I didn't do any bris yet, and I accidentally did the Sunday one first. It's the only way to understand it. According to that, Rabbi Meir has to hold that if you did the proper one first, you have no excuse for doing the later one. And therefore, it wouldn't make sense why Rabbi Shua in our Mishnah should say that you're allowed to that you don't have to bring a karban chatas for bringing the karban tmidim after the tmidim were already brought. So Gemara says this can't be what the machlokes. This can't be how Rabbi Meir understands this machlokes. Your explanation of the machlokes that he's saying that they only argue in a case of a Shabbos bris and a Sunday bris, because there you did the mistaken one first. That can't be the correct understanding over here, because in that case there is no mitzvah. When you did the Sunday bris and Shabbos, you didn't do any mitzvah. It's too early. You don't get a mitzvah for that. If Rabbi Meir holds that Rabbi Yeshua says you don't have to bring a karban for that, you're not chayav chatas, even though you didn't do any mitzvah, he would certainly agree that in the case of a Friday bris that you did on Shabbos, you don't have to bring a karban chatas for that, even if you did it second. You didn't have an excuse because you did the other mitzvah already, but at least here you did a mitzvah. You did make a mistake in the Dvar mitzvah. Okay, you shouldn't have gotten confused, but at least you did a mitzvah. You did a bris a day late, you still got a mitzvah for it. So this can't be the explanation. We need a new explanation, and the Gemara brings a new explanation, which solves the kasha on Rabbi Meir. That explanation is brought by Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai says, Rabbi Meir's understanding of the machlokes is as follows. In the case where you have a bris that was for Friday and Shabbos, and we say that over there is no machlokes, Rabbi Yeshua agrees that you chayiv if you do the Friday bris on Shabbos. There the case is where you did the Shabbos bris on Friday. You did one bris Friday and one bris Shabbos, and you got mixed up which one's which. You ended up doing the Shabbos bris on Friday, and you didn't realize. It comes Shabbos, you have one bris left to do, you do it, you didn't realize that's the Friday bris, and this is Chil Shabbos here. Now, everybody agrees that you chayav chatas for that. You know why? Because at the time you did the bris on Shabbos, there is no mitzvah anymore. There's nothing to push off Shabbos. The Shabbos bris is already done. It was done on Friday. Therefore, there is no dichoy Shabbos here. So you can't say, oh, I knew I was supposed to be doing something on Shabbos, and therefore I got mixed up. There was nothing left to do on Shabbos, and therefore Rabbi Yeshua would agree that you're chayav for that. Where's the machlokes? Where it was a Shabbos bris and a Sunday bris. There, even if you did the Shabbos bris already, and now you're doing the Sunday bris, and you're not being mekayim any mitzvah, but at least this Shabbos was supposed to be a bris. It was supposed to be something pushing off Shabbos. So you did two instead of one. You could say, I got confused, I got mixed up, I forgot that. I did it already because I was so busy worrying about the Chil Shabbos that was supposed to happen here anyway that was legal. So that being what the machlokes is about, I could understand Rabbi Shua in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shua in the Mishnah says that in the case where you brought karbanis tzibor, you brought the tmidim or the musafim on Shabbos, and you were supposed to, even though you did the tmidim first, and then you added another one that you weren't supposed to do, you still have an excuse. You can say, listen, I forgot that I did it already. I was so confused. I was so nervous about doing the mitzvahs on Shabbos, which are Derech Shabbos. I forgot that I did it already, and therefore I was Mechal Shabbos, and I did it. It's still a Tayyah B'Devar mitzvah, and you should be Potter. Now, the Gemara just asks, even in the case of the babies to do the bris, there's still some baby out there that's supposed to have a bris on Shabbos, so you could still say that the Shabbos is supposed to be pushed off for a bris. So the Gemara says, no, but not for this guy. He doesn't have a bris to do, and therefore he doesn't have an excuse. Okay, now the Gemara analyzes the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua further. Again, Rabbi Eliezer holds that if you bring a different animal as a karban Pesach, you chayav a karban chatas. Rabbi Shua holds your potter. The Mishnah had said that machlokes is only if the type of animal that you brought could have been a karban Pesach, where Rabbi Yeshua says that you have an excuse for being confused, and therefore you're potter for bringing a karban. However, if the type of animal is an animal which couldn't be a karban Pesach, such as a cow, or an That's too old. Vir Rabbi Eliezer agrees you have no excuse. You should not have made such a mistake, and therefore you're considered a shoygi, not a taya b'dvar mitzvah. The Gemara says this understanding is Rabbi Shimon's understanding of the machlekes. Rabbi Shimon says you only have an excuse if it's an animal that could have been a carbon Pesach. However, Rabbi Meir disagrees, and Rabbi Meir says even if it's an animal that you couldn't mix up with a carbon Pesach, you still have an excuse. Rabbi Shua would still say you're a taya b'dvar mitzvah, and you still don't have to bring a chatas. Now, how did you get confused? So the Gemara understands there's two factors here. Number one, could you actually get confused between them? Do they look similar? Could you mix them up? In that extent, if it's a cow, it can't really be confused with a sheep. However, there's another factor, and that is tirda, and that is this is something you're busy thinking about all the time. You know you have a carbon you have to bring, and therefore it's on your mind. And then when it actually comes time to shach the carbon, accidentally you do that one. So a cow, let's say you have a cow set aside to bring as a carbon shlamim, so it's on your mind. So you may bring it as a carbon Pesach by accident. You know you have to bring a cow as a shlamim. You know you have to bring a carbon Pesach. They're both on your mind. Because you're busy in your mind with both of them, you bring one instead of the other, and you get mixed up. Now, we understand, therefore, that if you have a cow, shlamim, you're supposed to bring, so it's on your mind, and Rabbi Meir would say, even though it couldn't really be a Pesach, I can understand you got confused. The Gemara's question is, what about where you don't have that cheshbon? So the Gemara says that if the animal is a balmum, so it couldn't be brought as any carbon at all, you have no excuse for getting confused, and Rabbi Meir would say that you're chayav for the balmum. The balmum can't be a carbon, and you're not going to get confused. The Gemara says, what about chulin? What about an animal which is not any carbon at all? So the Gemara wants to say, chulin, Rabbi Meir would say you are patur for. You do have an excuse for getting confused. The Gemara says you have an excuse for getting confused. Why? You're not busy thinking about it. According to Rabbi Meir, the only reason you could get mixed up is if you're busy thinking about it, because you know you have to bring it as a carbon at some point. So the Gemara says, no, Rabbi Meir holds both reasons for getting confused are valid. If it's similar to a carbon you're supposed to bring, like they're both sheep or whatever it is, there you could get confused because they're very similar. Also, if you have two karbanos you have to bring, one's a carbon tamid, one's a shlamim, that could get confused with the carbon pesach that you have to bring. Therefore, chulin, you could get confused because it's very similar. Other karbanos you could get confused because you know you have to bring them. A balmum is nothing. It's not similar. It's different because it's a balmum. It's not something you have to bring. You can't bring a balmum, and therefore you have no excuse. And Rabbi Meir would say that you have to bring a carbon chatas for bringing that. You can't call yourself a taya b'dvar mitzvah. Okay, this conversation concluded. The Gemara now quotes some Amoraim who discuss the concept of taya b'dvar mitzvah. Again, taya b'dvar mitzvah is supposed to be a situation where you did an iser, which if had you done it on purpose would be chayav kares. But you were trying to do a mitzvah, and you did do a mitzvah, but you were still violated in Isser Kares b'shoigeg. If it's a taya b'dvar mitzvah, according to at least Rabbi Yeshua, you can avoid the chiyav chata. So Gemara quotes some Amoraim here. So the Gemara says that Rav Yitzchak, Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, and Rabbi Zera were sitting together on the front doorstep of Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak, and they said the name of Reish Lakish, somebody who had two spits, roasting spits of meat in front of him. One was kosher meat, and one was nicer, which is an Isser Kares to eat. And he thought he was eating the kosher one, instead he ate the nicer one. So Reish Lakish says, Yechayev chatas, because you didn't do any mitzvah, even though you're trying to do a mitzvah, you didn't do any mitzvah, Yechayev chatas. Okay? Rav Yochanan says, somebody who's together with his wife when she's in nida, is chayav achatas. You don't call it a taya b'dvar mitzvah. So he's together with his yivimtai. That's the wife of his dead brother who has a mitzvah to do yibum to. He's together with her, and it turns out she was a nida, and he didn't know that's a taya b'dvar mitzvah, and he's patur. So the Gemara breaks this down one thing at a time. First of all, Rabbi Yochanan, what does he hold about Reish Lakish's case? What does he hold about the guy who ate noiser by accident? So the Gemara is not sure. The Gemara says it could be that he'll hold that case is for sure, that case you're for sure chayev because there's no mitzvah at all. But this case of the be'ila with the wife or the yivimtoy, there is a mitzvah there. Or it could be that case he'll say that you're for sure patur because you really there's nothing you could do there was nobody to ask. You made the mistake. There isn't anything we could have expected of you. Here, where he was together with somebody, could have asked the woman, what's your status exactly? And he's in somewhat responsible for the fact that he did the Isser. So, okay, now, so we're not sure what Rav Yochanan would say about Rish Lakish's case, but now let's try to figure out Rav Yochanan. He said that if it's his wife, he's chayev a carbon chadas, and if it's his yevama, he's not chayev carbon chadas. What's the difference? Either way, there's a mitzvah. Being together with one's wife is a mitzvah as well. So Gemara says, first of all, let's try to work it out that it's a case where one's wife is not a mitzvah. What could that case be? So the Gemara says, well, maybe his wife was pregnant already, so there's no mitzvah of Pururvu. There's no mitzvah of Pururvu, but there's still a mitzvah of Samchas Aina, still a mitzvah of being together with his wife, even if she's not going to become pregnant from it. So Gemara says, maybe it's talking about it wasn't the time where he's chayiv. He did his mitzvah already, and he's not up to his next time. Gemara says, there's still a mitzvah, even though it's not it's not the chiyuv time, but there's still a mitzvah. Gemara says, maybe it's talking about where it was time for her veses. It was time when she was supposed to be seeing her cycle, and therefore there's no mitzvah. Whereas there's time for seeing her cycle, then there's no difference between his wife or Yavama. Either way, he's not supposed to be together with her. Even his Yavama, it's forbidden. Whereas there's no, the Yavama is a strange woman to him. He couldn't be expected to ask her when her Veses is. But his wife, he's expected to ask her and make sure that she's not in that time, and therefore he's chayiv. He doesn't have an excuse of Toye B'dvar Mitzvah. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know, Rabbi Yochanan, which Tana does he hold? Like, who is the Tana that's backing him up with this halacha of Toye B'dvar Mitzvah? So there's a number of Tanaim behold of Toye B'dvar Mitzvah. The Gemara is going to work through them and try to find one that would agree with Rabbi Yochanan's halacha. Where first of all, calls Rabbi Yasi. Rabbi Yasi talks about somebody who carried a lulav in the street on Shabbos because he went to ask the Talmud Chacham, is it Toye B'dvar Mitzvah? Gemara says Rabbi Yasi would not necessarily agree to Rabbi Yochanan's halacha. Rabbi Yasi's case, the guy was very nervous because he has to do it today, has to do the mitzvah today. He's pressed for time. In this case, he's not pressed for time. He says, okay, maybe it's Rabbi Yeshua about the karbanos, our mission which we've been discussing all along, where somebody brought the wrong carbon on Erev Yantiv. So Gemara says, well, maybe that's also talking about where he was pressed for time. He also has to bring the carbon in the right time. He has to bring the carbon Pesach in the right day, and the other karbanos also in at the right day. So Gemara says, okay, well, maybe it's Rabbi Yeshua about the bris milah, which we discussed earlier. Gemara says about the bris milah. That's also he's pressed for time. He has to do the milah in the right day. Gemara says, okay, so it's Rabbi Yeshua discussing truma. Because we have a Mishnah that says, Rabbi Yeshua says, if somebody's eating truma, and he's assuming he's a kohen, and then he finds out that he's really a kohen puzzle. His mother was a divorced woman or a chalutza woman who was married to a kohen, and therefore he doesn't have a right to eat truma. So Rabbi Elazar says he violated the issur of eating truma when he's not a kohen who's kosher. He's got to pay for it. He has to add chaimish, he has to add a fifth. And Rabbi Yeshua says no. He's a toye b'dvar mitzvah. He has an excuse. So Gemara says no excuse. That's not necessarily going to back up Rabbi Yochanan also, because it could also be that he's pressed for time there. Maybe he was eating chametz truma and it was Erev Pesach, so he had to get rid of it. Or maybe it's different in that case because truma is called avoida, and the Torah says somebody who does an avoida by mistake is pater. So Gemara says something does avoida mistake is pater. First of all, how do you know that truma is called an avoida? So the Gemara first of all fills in this Mishnah here. The Gemara says our sources as follows. There's a Mishnah that says somebody who's bringing a carbon, and he's assuming he's a kohen kosher, and in the middle of bringing the carbon, he finds out that he's a ben grusha or ben chalutza. Any carbon that he did is possible according to Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Yeshua says no, it's kosher, because Rabbi Yeshua holds that's a special pasuk that says that you're okay. If you're a kohen and you find out you made a mistake, you're not really a kohen. It's okay. What's this pasuk? It says Baruch Hashem Chele Yofal Yodav Tirtzeh. It's talking about an avodah that you do, and it says Hashem will accept it if you did it with the right intent, even if it was wrong and you made a mistake. So Gemara says, okay, this is fine, but it's all working with the assumption that truma is an avodah. Who told you that truma is called an avodah? Eating truma is called an avodah. What does that have to do with anything? So Gemara says it was a story that happened with Rabbi Tarfon. Didn't come to the Beis Medrash one day, and Rabbi Gamliel found him, and he said, why don't you come to the Beis Medrash yesterday? So he said, because I was busy doing avodah. He said, you're busy doing avodah. You don't make any sense. There's no avodah anymore. There's no Beis Hamikdash. There's no avodah. He said, yeah, I was involved with truma. Truma is called avodah, like it says, avodah smatana etein eskehu naschem vazar karev yumas. So you see, it is called avodah, and therefore Rabbi Yeshua would hold based on the pasuk of Baruch Hashem Cheloi that it's not a psol, and based on that is what was backing up Rabbi. That therefore you could not use it as a proof to back up Rabbi Yochanan because That's Truma has a special halacha, but Rabbi Yochanan was talking about something else. So the Gemara leaves it without a
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.